everyone, and welcome to episode 37 of Not the Worsted Knitting Podcast. My name is Michelle, and I am the knitter and knitwear designer behind meeshyfrazz Knits. Today's episode is going to be a special episode where I chat about some of my favorite knitting books, and it's all books related to knitting, so it's not necessarily just one type of book. I actually got this idea because a couple weeks back when I did the video about my studio tour, part of that tour was showing my my bookcase with with most of my books in it. And I had a viewer ask me if I would do a recommendation video where I chatted about some of my favorite books. And it just so happens that today is a snow day, so it snowed this morning, and I'm just feeling like being cozy, and I don't know, there's something about feeling cozy and feeling like that's a good time to be looking at books. And so today felt like the right day to do an episode all about my favorite knitting books. So with that in mind, I have broken them into 4 categories. So the first category is general tips and techniques. The second category is pattern books. The third category is stitch dictionaries. And then the fourth category is pattern design and pattern writing. So I'll have these broken out in the timeline below. So if there's just like one category you're more interested than the other, then you can just skip to that category. So I guess I'll go ahead and get started. We will be starting with general tips and techniques. And I'm just kind of going down the line of like the books that I've found the most valuable. So in each category, they're not necessarily in order, but the ones I grabbed for earlier on are probably ones I've used more or have maybe had in my library for longer. The first book on my list is The Knitter's Book of Knowledge by Debbie Bliss. Now, this is one, I actually don't see people talk about this one a lot, and that's actually part of the reason why I wanted to share this. I know when people are getting started, a lot of people go for the Vogue knitting, like I think it's just like the Vogue knitting Bible or something like that. I don't know, it's like the giant compendium of like everything you need to know about knitting. But I picked this up, probably in like 2015, 2016, and I think it was new at the time. And I have found this to be such a great resource, just in the same sort of way that the Vogue knitting book is, but I don't know, there's just something about the book. It's a big, thick book, but it's not super heavy. It doesn't feel awkward for me to bring down. And I really like the way that this book is laid out. Like it has, I think it's designed nicely, and then it has illustrations for everything. And it's got a lot of different techniques of just all sorts of things. You know, it has a general bit of information about all the things you might need when it comes to knitting. You know, increasing, decreasing, binding off, casting on, different types of stitches, all sorts of things, all the abbreviations you need to know. It talks even a little bit about like the structure of yarn. So it's a really good introduction into kind of all things in the knitting and fiber arts world. And so for that, I've always really liked this. I would come to this when I wanted to kind of understand a technique better or try out maybe a different way of casting something on, or, you know, if I had a pattern where I wasn't entirely sure what the technique meant, most of the time I could come in here and find what that actually meant and how I was supposed to do it. And for me, I know people they learn in different ways. For me, I am definitely more of a static picture learner. I was always the person where when I would watch a YouTube video, I would have to pause it quite frequently just to kind of make sure. I need the steps kind of broken down very easily so I can take my time and do it and not feel like I'm missing anything. I guess, details are important to me, and I want to make sure I'm not missing a single thing. And so for me, having these like static images is really helpful, and I just really love this. So I don't know how easy this book is to get now. I've had it for like 10 years, but I don't imagine it's terribly difficult. I just picked this up at my local bookstore, a million years ago now, but but it's a great little book, and it even has a section in the back about if you want to develop your own design. So I just think it's well laid out, and it's just got a lot of really basic information in this book. So this is something that has been a great resource to me throughout the years, and something I really am happy to have in my library and will still probably grab for if there's something. I mean, I know it's so easy to kind of Google everything now or find a YouTube video for it, but sometimes it's just kind of nice to see it in a book. You can read a little bit more about it and then just have the illustrations. I'm a sucker for the knitting illustrations, and maybe, I don't know if that's like an old-fashioned thing or what, but I really like to follow instructions that way. Okay, next up on the list, I am sure most of you have seen this a ton already, so I don't need to talk too much about it, but I felt like I couldn't have a video like this without covering this, and this is Patty Lyons' Knitting Bag of Tricks. This just came out a year or two ago. It's a very recent publish, and this is also, it's just a really great book full of techniques. What I like about this book is that it covers a little bit of the basics, but what it's really doing is talking about better ways to do things. And I might have actually, yeah, I accidentally flipped to this page, but this is a really good example. It has recommendations on how to make better SSKs. An SSK is a slip knit, and that's a decrease. And sometimes when you do an SSK, it just looks a little wobbly on your knit, on your finished piece, and this has a couple of different techniques on how to clean that up and make it a little bit less obvious. So it looks almost as nice as your knit two together if you're kind of doing those in tandem. And it's just things like that I think are really helpful about this, where it takes your knitting that you already know and it elevates it to maybe a slightly more polished level and gives you some techniques that just take it to that next level. And I think that's why this is really valuable. And plus, it's really small. It's just really great to have in your library. Next up, I'm gonna actually show both of these because I feel like these kind of go together in a way. One I've had, well, I'll just show this one first. I've had this one for a little bit now, and this is just a book on increases and decreases. It's 99 step-by-step methods for increase and decrease by Judith Durant. And what I like, it's just like a little spiral bound book, and it literally just has all different types of increases and decreases and what they look like. I find that especially when I'm designing something and I want to make sure it looks a certain way, I like to have something like this where I can see a different way to do the increases and decreases to maybe play better with the fabric. And I found this to be really helpful, and I haven't really even had it for that long. And adding to that, a viewer actually recommended this book to me, which I hadn't seen before, and it's kind of like, I think it's the same publisher and it's the same like series, but it's a different author. And this is called Cast On, Bind Off, 54 Step-by-Step Methods by Leslie Ann Bestor. And it's the same sort of thing. It just gives you a whole bunch of different cast on and bind off methods. And what I like about this is it gives you sort of, let me see if I can find, yeah, so we'll do this, and this is a Turkish cast on. It shows you what it looks like, and then it gives you the characteristics as well as what it's good for, like toe-up socks. And so this is just, I feel like these are just really great to have in your library. I think it's important to have like a big book on kind of the basics of knitting, because you just never know when you might need that in hard copy form. And then it's really nice to have these supplemental books to take it to that next level, to learn better techniques or just different techniques for something specific. Just for instance, like this alternating cable cast on. This is something I am using in my current sweater design that I'm working on. It's a 2x2 broken rib sweater, and the collar is knit in 1x1 twisted rib. And I just didn't think that a tubular cast on looked particularly nice with that collar. And so having this resource to do an alternating cable cast on was great, because it's just another alternative, and it ended up working out better than some of the techniques that are more common that I'm already familiar with. So these are just really great to have on hand. All right, last up in this category, this is kind of a special one, and this is the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook. And this is by Deborah, Robson, and Ekarius. Hopefully that's how you say this name. I thought this was a fun one to add on because you've got your knitting specific technique books. Those are really helpful to have. Sorry if you can hear some scurrying in the background. The cats are playing with their little whippy toy and Tuna is taking it upstairs. Anyway, what I like about this is it gives kind of an introduction about each type of sheep or wool, or fiber really, because it's not all sheep. And then it shows you kind of the properties of that fiber. And I think it even shows you what it looks like clean versus raw, all the different ways, like, yeah, like 2-ply combed. I don't know. It's just, it shows you all the different ways that the fiber can be used. It talks about the properties that are best for using these. And I just think once you get a little bit further in your knitting journey, it's really nice to understand a little bit more about the fiber you're working with, because sometimes certain fibers might be wonderful and beautiful and your favorite to work with, but maybe don't work great with cables because they're like not quite as round, or you know, maybe you can't wear it because it makes you too hot, or it's too drapey, or whatever it may be. And yeah, I mean, it even has like a little section on mohair and the mountain goats, and I don't know, I just think this is a really fun one, especially because out of all things knitting, fiber is probably where I have more gaps in my knowledge, and I suspect that that's probably the case for a lot of people. I know kind of the basics, you know, the common fibers that you use a lot, but there's a lot of details in this about very specific sheep breeds that I just had no idea. And while spinning and all of that is probably not something I'm ever going to get into, I can fully appreciate what goes into it, and knowing the properties of this when I go to pick the yarn is super helpful to me. So I think this is a really nice book to have, and it's fun to just flip through sometimes, like on a snowy day when you're a little bit bored and you're cooped up inside. I don't know, this is one of those books where sometimes I kind of forget that I have it, and then I pull it out and I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. So every time I pull it out, I learn something new, and it's just a really, really good book to have if you're trying to maybe increase your knowledge base on fibers that you're using. Okay, next up we are in the pattern books category. So I've just got a handful in this one, mostly because at this point, I don't know, I mean, I've bought a lot of pattern books through the years, and I find that I mostly like them maybe for inspiration, or just because I really like the photos or a specific technique that's done, but I don't often use them for knitting from. I don't know why. I love books and I love collecting them, but my pattern books are maybe some of my least used. With that being said, I did want to pull from some of the ones that I've either used or that I enjoy flipping through for whatever reason. So first up on that list is Knitting from the North by Hilary Grant. And it's all designs that are inspired by Nordic and Fair Isle traditions. So this, I don't know, this was one of those books that spoke to me. I think I've also had this for close to 10 years now. I've had it for a while. And I loved the photography. I know that that's not why you buy a book, but I thought the photography was really nice. And then I just really liked the design. I mean, I'm definitely one for high contrast, geometric designs. I love color work, and I love the kind of traditional Fair Isle that is shown in this book. And if you've watched my videos previously, then you will recognize this hat. This is a hat that I knit from the book. I'll be honest, this is the only thing I've knit from the book, but I did really enjoy this hat. I thought it was a really pretty design. I liked the way it worked up. I will warn for anybody that's looking at this, these are all fingering weight patterns. So this whole book, I think it uses Jamieson's Shetland Spindrift. like every single pattern calls for that. But I think what you get is really beautiful. The patterns are really nice. And if you really like kind of that traditional Nordic inspired Fair Isle design, this is a really good book to have, just even for the charts. There's just some really nice, beautiful color work. It's not too complicated. The repeats are relatively easy to remember and follow. And then also you just get, these beautiful scenes, which I don't know, I just think it's really beautiful. This is a book I've had for years and I don't plan on getting rid of it. This is just a book that I like to have and flip through from time to time just because I think it's really beautiful. So this is a nice one. Next up, we've got Seasonal Slow Knitting by Hannah Thiessen. And this one was actually given to me as a gift a few years back. And I actually think this is just a really nice book. I haven't actually knit anything from it yet, but what I like about it is the whole theme of this book is kind of about slowing down and being thoughtful about your makes, and not even just knitting, but kind of all things making. Like it's got some other fun things in here. Like I think it even has, you know, some recipes in it, like really, really simple recipes for like cozy kind of things. And then it's got a couple of like sewing patterns in it. Let's see. Yeah, like this hanging circular needle storage sewing pattern. And then there were a couple of things that had like caught my eye that I have always sort of wanted to knit from it. And it's just got some really nice designs in it. Like I actually think this cowl is really pretty. It's one that's been on my list that I've wanted to make and I haven't yet, but it's just got some really nice, thoughtful designs. The photography is nice. The book feels calm and I feel calm when I'm reading it. And it's just one that I really like to flip through, and I think that the patterns are actually pretty nice. There are some times where you buy a book and the patterns are almost an afterthought, where you're like, well, this is a nice book, but I'm never gonna knit any of this stuff. But I actually think there are just some really beautiful patterns in here. And it's just kind of all around home comfort. It's not necessarily just clothing or accessories or things like that. It's all about just being cozy and at home and working a little bit at a slower pace. All right, last up, my last recommendation for pattern books. This is Knits from the LYS. And this is a fun one because, so this is from the owners of Espace Tricot. And I don't think it's just the owners, Naomi and Stephanie. I think a lot of their staff actually worked on patterns for this. Partially, I'm a huge fangirl of them. I've been watching their journey since they took over Espace Tricot. Every time they put out a YouTube episode, I immediately watch. I love them. I love their dynamic. I just love how different their aesthetics are and how it works together, but also how they can design and knit things that are specific to their aesthetics and then share it, and it works so different with each of them. I don't know, I just love them. I love watching them, and I think they come up with really cool designs, and I also appreciate that most of their designs are free because, I mean, they're promoting the yarn for the store, but it's really still very generous to be offering these patterns. So when this book came out, I immediately purchased it. And I have not knit anything from it. However, I do appreciate and enjoy this book. So first off, you get these really nice scenes of Montreal, which I have been to Montreal once, and oof, this was 2007, 2008, so it's been a bit. It's been a bit since I've been in Montreal, but I absolutely loved Montreal. I thought it was so beautiful, and I want to go back now and see Espace Tricot. So it's really nice to flip through this and get some memories of, you know, when I was in Montreal a million years ago. And so there's actually one pattern in here which is funny because it's not at all my aesthetic, and I don't think it's something I will knit up, but I so appreciate the work that went into it. And if you have watched Espace Tricot's podcast, and you'll be familiar with this cardigan. What is it called? Sorry, I guess I should have given you the name. It is called the Aurora cardigan. And so it's an all over cable cardigan, and you'll see it has these panels. And this was a design by Stephanie Earp. And I think that maybe she had designed this earlier and then went back. I'm not entirely sure, I can't quite remember. But at any point, she decided to separately add panels of Fair Isle into these, like the panels that she made, she knit separate panels of Fair Isle and sewed them into those panels. So not only is this an all over cabled cardigan, but it also has these panels of Fair Isle. And I'm flipping through because I don't want to show any of the charts, but you can see what she's done here. And I'll be completely honest, this isn't my aesthetic and it's not something I would wear, but it's such a feat of like knitting engineering that I had to buy the book just for that alone, because I mean, what an insane design in such a great way. Like, who would have even thought to do that? So I just think that that's really clever. It's just, I love that way of thinking, that I look at this and I'm like, that is not a design you will see anywhere else. Like there's no resemblance to anything else I've seen in recent publishing. So I just think that is really cool. But then they have much more approachable designs, like this guy, which I actually do think is really cute. And I would love to knit this up. What is this called? The composition book pullover. I think there's also like a t-shirt version, but look at how cool that is. So I just think this is a really fun book. Also, I really like supporting them because I just think what they do for the community is really great, and I love their podcast, and it's just a really beautiful book to have in my library. And I do suspect at some point I will knit something from it, probably that composition book sweater. All right, next up on the list, we've got stitch dictionaries. So I've probably showed a couple of these in my podcast previously, but I love to have different types of stitch dictionaries on hand. So the first couple that I'm going to show are actually more like color work dictionaries, and then I'll show a couple like technical stitch dictionaries. But this guy, 200 Fair Isle Motifs. This is by Mary Jane Mucklestone, and then I also have the 150 Scandinavian Motifs, also by her. I know you've seen this one because this is where I got the idea for those Viking socks that I have made 3 versions of. But I'll start with the Fair Isle one. What is really cool about this, so it gives you a little bit of like classic design principles, how motifs are traditionally used, thinking about color pairing and all of that. But then when you get into the good stuff, what I actually really love about these is it gives you a preview of all of the different motifs before you have to like flip through the entire book, which is great. Especially, I love these for inspiration. I don't necessarily use these as an exact, copy, if you will, but when I'm stuck, like if I'm in a creative rut and I'm trying to think of a way to come up with a motif that will fit in a certain area with a certain kind of idea in mind, I'll flip through this and sometimes it'll help trigger like, oh, that's cool. If I added this to it, it could look like this. And actually a good example, which I thought would be kind of fun to show, is, so that guy, this red guy right here, this triggered an idea for me when I was working on my Flocking Good Time socks. So I had the main sheep motif, but I wanted some kind of like relief rows in between all of that heavy color work because, especially on an all over color work sock, or really all over color work anything, I kind of think it's important to have relief rows so you don't kind of get overly exhausted with the color work. And also it helps to break up the design because visually I think a design stands out more when you give it room to breathe. And so I was trying to think of a way to break up the sheep. And I was just flipping through this to kind of get ideas of like smaller motifs. And when I saw this guy, it completely opened up this idea in me of like, hey, those kind of look like sheep. What if I did something very similar to like an X and O motif, but instead of it being an O, I made the O a sheep. And so I changed up the O a little bit to give it like a sheep head. And that's sort of where I got the idea for the relief rows. So I just love books like this just to kind of trigger my creative ideas. And it's just really great too because it's traditional Fair Isle motifs, so you will see a lot of these motifs a lot, and they're just really nice to have, especially if you're just like, I want something really, really classic in my design. It's so easy to flip through and pick something really fun. And so the Scandinavian motifs, I will say this one is a little bit more, what's the right word for it? Like, these are quite a bit more stylized. And so I don't know, I mean, I love to look at these and they are inspiring, but these I have more so used as like, hey, that's just really cool, like the Viking ships. And then I'll just end up working with it, trying not to show the chart. But yeah, this is the page where I got the Viking ship motifs from. So these are just really, really cool to have. I just love having dictionaries to kind of get my creative juices flowing. In terms of stitch dictionaries, so you can see that these get a lot of love from me. This is the Ultimate All-Around Stitch Dictionary by Wendy Bernard. I think she's got a few of these. I actually did end up getting another one of her books, but it ended up being very similar to this and in fact had a lot of the same motifs. So this one is kind of my go-to. This is my all-around. I start here first. When if I'm playing with a yarn, or if I kind of have an idea in my head, but I'm not quite sure if that stitch pattern is going to work, or if I kind of want to see alternates to a certain stitch motif or pattern, this is where I go. And what I love, let's see if I can, try not to give too many charts away, but it just shows you all the different techniques for like different cabling. It's got sections for lace cabling. It's got a little bit on color work. Specifically, kind of has a bigger section on like mosaic color work. It has like knits and pearls and the different things that you can achieve with that. And I'll go ahead and show this too, because I just think it's fun to kind of show sometimes where you never know where inspiration is gonna hit. And so let's see, try not to show the chart. But this nestled diamond, it's like a traveling cable. It's a right slipped cross and a left slipped cross cable. And it basically just travels your stitch. So it's essentially like a slip stitch that you are traveling to have it kind of raise above your knitted fabric. And this is what inspired me for my prismatic reflection sweater. I'm not sure if you can really see the cabling on that right now with this lighting, but I will pop up some of my swatches or even a photo. This started where I did a 1-for-1 where I swatched this swatch exactly. And I was thinking I liked it, but I didn't like it as is. And so I ended up playing with the idea of what if I focused on just diamonds, and then what if I overlapped the diamonds? And it sent me on this rabbit hole of like old Argyle sweaters and the different motifs that you would have that are centered on your sweaters. And that's just where this all kind of went. And so sometimes I just like to, when I'm bored or I don't have anything going on, or I just want to kill some time, I'll just flip through these, and you never know what's going to spark inspiration for you. And I think that these are just really, really great to have on hand, especially if you're thinking about getting into design or self-drafting. These are nice books to have. And, like in the back here, it's got techniques on how to do mosaic color work. Yeah, it's just really cool. I get so many ideas from this, and I love this book. This is hands down my favorite stitch dictionary. I have a ton of stitch dictionaries. I probably have like 10 at least at this point, but this is always the first one I grab. The second one I grab is this one, and this is actually a recent addition to my library, but you can see it is just as well loved, if not maybe even a little more loved. I have so many bookmarks in here, and sometimes when I'm working on something, my yarn band becomes the bookmark. But these are so inspiring to me, and what I like about this book is that I found that a lot of my stitch dictionaries kind of have the same motifs over and over again. This one has a lot of really different techniques where it's playing off of the same idea, but it's like, what if we tried it with one extra stitch knit, or 1 extra stitch purl. What if we staggered it? What if we did this? And so you end up getting some really, really interesting techniques in here. And I think this is so full of great ideas. Every page I flip through, I'm like, wow, that would be really pretty. That would be so pretty in this color or in this yarn. And this is actually where it's good to have a book on fiber, because you can look at one of these patterns and think like, okay, what kind of fiber would work well in this situation? So this is where those kind of like go hand in hand. But it's just page after page of really beautiful stitch patterns. So I think this is another great one to have. This is 400 knitting stitches by Potter Craft. And I will note that the charts are done a little bit differently here. You'll see, you know, different books the charts will be in different styles. So just make sure you look at the key beforehand, because a symbol in one book might mean something else in another book. So just be aware of that when you're getting these kind of stitch dictionaries. All right, our last category is in pattern design and pattern writing. So I know this one is a little bit more specific, but I still think there are a lot of people who are interested in this. Even if you don't necessarily want to publish patterns, if you want to design your own pattern for yourself, these are really great to have. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is the Knitting Pattern Writing Handbook. And that is by Christina McGrath and Sarah Walworth. This is a recent book that I have just gotten a few months back, maybe a year ago. I'm not sure at this point. What is time? But what I like about this is it gives a little bit of information about all of the foundations of a good knitting pattern. So it talks about what should be in a good knitting pattern. What are things you should really think about when you're writing your first knitting pattern? It even does a whole chapter on understanding gauge. So it has a lot of really nice illustrations, and it'll talk through how to read gauge, how to explain gauge, things that are important not only for understanding for yourself, but on how to communicate these ideas to other knitters so they understand how to achieve the same thing, because that is so important. And I have found that I have gotten tripped up on gauge alone when writing a pattern more than once, because I'm sure you've experienced this. Sometimes it's honestly just even hard to read your gauge, especially when you are working with larger stitch patterns or motifs. So understanding where to read the gauge, what kind of measurements you're putting, not always going with the normal, 4 inches, 10 centimeters when it doesn't make sense, if it means that you're going to get a more accurate gauge. So all of those things are really important to think about. It talks also about armhole depth, the importance of fitting multiple sizes, being size inclusive. It's got checklists, which I love. So each section you'll get a checklist, and then you'll get some questions and answers on just things to kind of be aware of before you get started on this section. And then the other thing that I thought was really nice for them to add is they have guidelines for measuring your body at certain points, understanding what those labels mean in terms of, because sometimes you'll read a pattern and they'll have labels that maybe you're not completely familiar with, and this shows you exactly where to measure those. And this is so important for being a knitwear designer, to know where to measure to make sure that you have the right numbers and are giving people the right information. I just appreciate that they have a breakdown of sizes and all of the different fits, what their like general idea of what the numbers are that you need for each size in all of the different areas of the body. And they have it for women, adult men, and then they also have it for infants and maybe babies. Yeah, they have it for infants and children. So it's a whole bunch of knowledge in here on, you go from the design aspect where you've come up with this creative idea and you've even made it for your size, but this takes you to the next step of how do you communicate that to other knitters, and then also how do you size it up and down for other knitters. And so this is a really good resource that I love to flip through. I have another resource which is very similar, but I also think this is worth sharing, so I'm going to share this one as well. And this is the Beginner's Guide to Writing Knitting Patterns by Kate Atherley. This is also something I bought not too long ago. Maybe I've had it a couple of years. I don't even know anymore. What I like about this is that it breaks it down very, very easy for you. Like it's a very basic understanding of going through how you want to like list every certain thing, and things like, you know, the best practice on how to write a chart, how to write written instructions on a chart, even things like you need to make sure that you've got a proper rule line around your chart so people can see the lines, you know, things like that, where it's like, it's probably common knowledge, but sometimes when you're neck deep in writing a pattern, you might forget that it's very obvious for you, but somebody just coming to this might have no idea what they're reading, what they're looking at. And so I just think this is one that's really fun. It's got a lot of fun little helpful tips throughout. And so I just think both of these are really great resources, and I can't recommend one without recommending the other. It also even has, you know, sections on formatting and layout, talking about working with test knitters, all of that. So another really great resource. And my last book, this is the last book that I am going to chat about. This is kind of a heavy duty design book, but I think this is a really great resource. It's not for the faint of heart. So this is called Knitwear Design Workshop, a comprehensive guide to hand knits by Shirley Payton. I was on a wait list for a year and a half for this book from the used bookstore website. It was really hard to find this book. I had heard somebody had recommended this book years ago. I'm not sure who it was. I can't remember, but I remember coming across this book and it being on my list of books that I wanted in my library. And so I finally got this, like, also like a couple years ago. I don't know. Anyway, you don't care when I got it. What I really like about this book is just the wealth of knowledge and information in here. Now, I'll be honest, the styling, the patterns that they show are a little bit dated in terms of, you know, you can tell when this came out that this is not necessarily speaking today's modern trends, but that's not why you get a book like this. Yeah, like you can see, you know, you look at the photos and obviously it's a much longer, tighter fitting design than what you're seeing today. So like not exactly with it in the modern fashion sense, but what it does have, which I think is fantastic, is equations upon equations on how to figure out your measurements with your gauge. And it has, I mean, it breaks down ways to get your calculations, figuring out lengths based on amount of rows, doing it even, like it has a math check up here to make sure your math is correct. And so here, this is a page all on a modified drop shoulder. And it gives you all the measurements, all the recommended measurements that you would want. And what I think is great about this is just having the ratios and the measurements to kind of be a starting point. Now, with that in mind, I will say that this is a book that is meant to be knit flat. So you're knitting everything flat. You're knitting the front panel and then you're knitting the back panel separately, all of that. So I wouldn't necessarily use this as like a one-for-one for designing my patterns, but I do use this when I'm trying to come up with construction. So if I know I want to make a drop shoulder sweater and I'm trying to figure out the best ratios or when to start and stop certain things, that is what a book like this is really good for, because it's going to tell you what you're looking for in terms of fit, how much depth you're looking for, where the shoulder should sit, all of those things. And so it's not going to give me my stitch counts and all of that, but I'm going to do a gauge swatch. And then I'm going to take those measurements and I'm going to apply that to my gauge, and that will give me my numbers. And that's at the very least a starting off point for my construction. And that is what I will do to kind of start with my size and So I'll kind of get the numbers for my size and see if everything looks okay. From there, I will do the grading to grade it up and down for the other sizes, and then I will start knitting it. And then as I'm knitting it, if I find issues with the fit, then I will adjust that and adjust that for all the sizes after the fact. But I kind of use myself as the test starting point to make sure that it's all fitting right. But at the very least, it's just good to have this to know where to get started with these constructions. Even something like, I was trying to figure out the best way to knit a tank top design, and I came here and they didn't necessarily have like a tank top, but they had like a tunic dress, but it gave you kind of the lines for the upper body and the bust and how you're starting that. And with a tank top, you are kind of starting flat anyway, so it's easy to kind of take that and know what you would need to do to apply that to working in the round. And so this is a fantastic book to have in your library if you want to know more about construction. I highly recommend it. I know it might be difficult to get, so if this is something you're interested in, I would probably go look for it now and put your name on a wait list if it's not available, because eventually somebody will trade it in. This is a used book, but I mean, you'd never know. So it's just a really great book. And then also it even has, you know, like understanding symbols. So there's always, I feel like in most of these books, you're going to get kind of a general basic section of like, here's how to understand the very basics of knitting, which you could get in a more specific book tailored to that. But if you have any interest in construction, even if you don't want to design, but you just want to know more about constructing a perfect garment to fit your body, I think a book like this is really good to have in your library. Well, that's it. So those are my favorite books. Those are the books that I would most recommend. These are not by any means all of my books. I have many, many more knitting books. Some you can still see. I mean, you can see I kind of pilfered through some up here and my bookcase upstairs, but these are the ones that I kind of reach for time and time again. Maybe in the future, I'll do a more specific video tailored to like all the Stitch dictionaries I have and how I would rank them. I'm not sure if that's interesting or not, and I didn't want to fill this space with too much of that. I really wanted to just give my go-tos, the things that I am reaching for all the time, and the books that I really recommend having in your library. So if there are any books that you really recommend that I didn't talk about, let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for new knitting books. I love having them as resources. I love having them as inspiration. I can never have too many books, especially knitting books, so I will happily take any and all book recommendations for sure. But yeah, thank you so much for watching if you stuck around until now. If you have any questions about any of these books, I'd be happy to give more information, so feel free to, you know, reach out if you do. If you would like to get in touch with me, I am meeshyfrazz on Instagram, Ravelry, and Blue Sky. I am meeshyfrazz@gmail.com, and you can find me at my blog, which is meeshyfrazzknits.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.